my name is Arwyn. Most people know me as Arwyn Swanger on LinkedIn or Arwyn Phoenix because my middle name happens to be Phoenix. But I am a really well-spoken advocate in the field of neurodivergency when it comes to autism, when it comes to mental health, being a survivor of physical, emotional, and sexual trauma, and being somebody who's had to fight from the ground up, who has been kicked down multiple times. I try to share my story to help others. So this is the most raw that I will be, and so forgive me if I cry. So I was born, not Arwyn. I was actually born Andrea Renee Stevens. That is my dead name. I do not share or talk about it, but I figured this is the right place to do so, just because it has a huge part of why I am the way I am. So I was born to a 20-year-old mother who had significant mental health and significant an unrealistic view on life. She was 5 days after her 20th birthday. She had never changed a diaper. She had never held a baby. She had never done anything. And I was like her pet project. 18 months after I was born, my brother Cameron was born. Cameron and I kind of were close growing up, and then we drifted apart, and then he ended up going to this point of beyond ultra religious. So I love everybody despite what your background is, what your beliefs are. I don't care. I will never judge. My brother ended up going down a road where if you do anything other than what he believes, you're cast to hell. If you're Mormon, you're in a cult. If you're Catholic, you're in a cult. If you're this, you're in a cult. I couldn't deal with it. And so I went a different path, and I have always gone more towards that spiritual path, which has led me now, like I said, to where I am. Growing up, it was really, really toxic and really controlled. My dad was 29 when I was born. He is undiagnosed autistic, undiagnosed bipolar, and undiagnosed neuro. Like, this man, like, sometimes I talk to him and I'm just like, Dad, what is it that you're trying to communicate? Because even who I've been able to communicate through verbal and like just emotional talking and connections and being able to use my empathy to try to help understand, I can't always understand this man. And it took a long time. And until I was about 33, I didn't realize how bad my dad was, especially not like in a bad way, like his health. His health has always been like an afterthought. He grew up very, very poor and very, very abused. And because of that, he kind of went down a different path. So at 17 years old, he had enlisted in the Marines. He met my mom when they were, I think he was 28. He was the best friend of her ex-boyfriend that was abusing her. That man moved out. My dad moved in. Within 3 years, they were married. Very dysfunctional marriage. They ended up divorcing, I think, when I was 6. At that point is when the abuse started. Prior to that, I did not know abuse. I didn't know what like abuse was. I wasn't hit. I wasn't being raped. I wasn't having any of that stuff happen to me. The first trauma that I remember, I was probably 4 or 5, and I had this eyebrow actually burned off halfway with a cigarette. I was at a bowling alley, and my dad had a cigarette out. Of course, in the 90s, you're allowed to smoke in buildings, and he wasn't paying attention, and I ran right into it. And I remember that day specifically because I remember the screaming and my mother freaking out and my dad and her fighting. And then it was shortly, like I said, within like a 2-year frame, they were divorced. My mother fell smitten with somebody that was 23 years older than her. His name was Jimmy. He is one of the biggest people that I talk about when I have nightmares, because he is literally like the monster in the closet. It's what I refer to him as. He was in his almost 50s when he got with my mother, and they ended up being together for almost 8 years. Very, very toxic. So this is the same man. I was 6 years old, first grade, had a babysitter. And when she was out with that babysitter, the babysitter decided to rape me twice. And I remember it very, very specifically. I remember what happened. And I remember my little brother, who, like I said, is 18 months younger than me, not knowing what was happening to his sister. And I just told him to lay down on the floor and stay there, and then I'd be okay. And I remember that. And it bothers me. I don't understand how a grown-ass man to a 17, 16, 17, 18-year-old teenager gets off on a 6-year-old. Like, that's disgusting. Like, I don't understand. And so that was when she was going out with me. Right after that, he started abusing me. I developed really early, so I started going through puberty really, really young, the way my mother did. It's one of the reasons why I've had some of the issues I've had. And he used to make me model bras and panties at 7, 8, 9. Because by second grade, I was already in training bras. By 14, I was already into like a double D. I was just very, very young with puberty. Started having the cycles at 10 years old, didn't know what was happening to my body. But my mother always said I was very hyper aware, and she noticed I was very hypersexual from a very young age. And I remember that. I remember like not being disturbed by the thought of somebody else doing something. I didn't know what it was that they were doing, but it didn't bother me. And I think that comes a lot just because of the abuse that had happened. Ended up getting really, really bad. And when I was 14 years old, I was at a friend's house in Arlington and in Washington. And her grandmother told me, "You're not going home. I'm not letting you go home. If I let you go home, is going to kill you, and you are not going to go there." And she kept me. And her name was Patty Dillard, and she was my adopted grandma. She was in my life for a very short period of time. Then we found each other later on Facebook. I'm hoping that I can hopefully reconnect with her at some point. But I had a friend named Desi, and her grandma made sure that I was safe. At the same time, I had my best friend I grew up with. Her name was Jamie. And Jamie had seen some of the things that had happened to me, but Jamie wasn't allowed at that point. Like, she wasn't coming over. She had her own things going on. And I remember being told that I was going to Idaho. And I went to Idaho, and I stayed there for, I think, a couple of weeks. And then I ended up coming back to Washington. And it was really, really hard. When I was in Idaho, I was touched by somebody, and being the fact that I'm undiagnosed still at this point of any disability. Like, they knew that I had a disability, they just didn't know what it was. And they had already said I had extreme depression. So I was put on at 13. I was put on everything from Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Seroquel, all of those medications, up to Depakote, lithium, and these heavy duty psychotics, but nothing was working. I was still cutting myself. I was still wanting to self-harm. I wanted to take myself out because I couldn't live with what was happening to me, and nobody was listening. I felt like I was crying for help, and nobody heard my cries. And then in 8th grade, my dad had finally had enough and decided to call CPS and try to get us out. At that time, and this is in the 2000s, so it would have been 2001, 2002, CPS, instead of doing their job, went and told my mother that she either leaves gym or they're taking the kids. I don't understand why they even gave her that option. She turned her head. She knew what was happening. It was happening right in front of her. We should have been taken directly from her and I wouldn't have gone through a lot of the things. I truly do not believe some of the stuff that happened following that would never have happened because I wouldn't have been in that environment and I could have gotten some help that I really needed. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. Come back from Idaho, and we live in a black mold filled apartment. Um, I'm walking 2 miles to school and back. I was going to a junior high where I was being bullied. Um, I was put on birth control shot, the Depo-Vera birth control shot at 14. So imagine being 145, 150 pounds, and you're kind of always built and stocky. And then jumping up to almost 300 pounds with you're teased, you're humiliated, you can't run, you can't do these things. And that is what my life was for almost 20 years. Um, so from the age of 14 on, I knew that I was just a fat ass. I was nothing, right? I was a girl, I was big, I had big boobs, so people liked me because of that, but that was it. They didn't see like what was inside. Um, when my mother and were together in the 90s, they did work within the multimedia industry. So they worked with KISS 106.1 in Seattle. They had a fan club that they were a part of called the Chris and Dana fan club, Chris Collins and Dana Dearden. Chris Collins is actually on my LinkedIn. He is a friend, somebody I consider a friend. He is somebody that saw me from very young age growing up. And I used to hang out in the studio. I always felt like the love for music, but I remember being a kid and hanging out in the studio and not being treated badly because of my disability. Like people just took the time and talked to me. And so fast forward, all that happens, and she ends up divorcing and gets with a man just as bad, if not worse, for the next 10 years. So from 15 until I was 23 years old, I was abused by this man. Um, I was told that I was property. I was not a person. I was at this point at 23 dating my ex-husband before we got married. So I was told that I was his property, his bitch. I needed to do what he said, when he said, how he said, and no questions asked. I was to be a submissive little person, like not even a woman. And with some really, really, really hard stuff going through high school. When I was in high school, I was supposed to graduate '06, graduated '07. I was a super senior. This was around the time of phone chat rooms. So if we remember, around the Seattle area, probably in around like '04, '05, '06, there was a lot of stuff that was happening. And pedophiles were being found on these chat rooms. They commonly had older men, typically 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that would make noises indicating that they were pleasuring themselves while on the phone, seeking out specifically on their messages little girls, little boys, teenagers, this, that. It was disgusting. I was stupid and was on, and I can say that now, I was not thinking smart. And I ended up getting on the phone chat room at 16, and somebody was just being nice to me. So I was just talking to him. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'll talk to you. You know, it gives me something to do. I don't have anyone else to talk to, so I might as well talk to you. And the guy ended up being a predator. He would ask me weird questions like, what does it look like outside? Where do you live? Oh, I live in Lake Stevens. No big deal, right? Lake Stevens is a big enough town. No. This man took some time over the next hour and had me describe certain things around my surroundings. And the next thing I know, this man comes to my house. And he was not who he said he was. He was supposed to be, 18, 19. My age group, basically, my social group. And he wasn't. He was in his later 20s, maybe early 30s. I only knew this because I followed my gut. He happened to come in and he had tried kissing me, and it felt weird. I was like, no, I don't know you. And I looked down on his hand, and he's got a wedding ring. And I looked at him and I said, what the fuck is that? And he said, "Oh, it's my ring. Don't worry about it." And I said, "No, but you're married and I'm 16 years old. This isn't okay. You're not who you said you are." This man attempted to put his hands on me, and I was able to defend myself off. I called, I had a best friend, Jessica, at that time, and I called her house and I said, "He's trying to rape me. I need you to get here now." She had her brother and his best friend, Nick, ride their bikes literally a mile down the road. They had the cops on the phone. The cops showed up within 15 minutes. The guy had already left. They had me give him a description. And I was told, "Don't worry, we won't tell your parents. You're of age of consent, so we don't need to say anything to your parents." Because my fear was I was going to get abused when Ellen found out that I was on the phone chat line. So all of this goes on. And then 3 days later, I get a call from the sergeant of Lake Stevens Police Department telling me, "I'm sorry. I know we told you we don't have to tell your parents, but this is a serious issue. And I need you to come in and I need you to fill out a report." And I went in and I did that. And this sergeant had his daughter, who had agreed to go on as to try to lure this man out, lure this predator out. And they did that. I don't know whatever came of it, but I know I never saw that man again. And I know that he was a predator, and I know that I wasn't his first attack. Everything going through after that was it was a weird time in my life. So at 16, I had broken up with a boyfriend following being told that he was going to kill himself because of me. I didn't do something right, or I don't know what I didn't do, but I didn't do something right. And he called me and said, "I'm going to overdose on my insulin and it's your fault." And it was just that other nail in the coffin. I felt very, very heavy and I wasn't okay. And I started hurting myself. I would cut myself. I would do like the old pen ink and try to literally carve in my back or carve in my arms. And it's probably why I have so many tattoos now, right? Because I found a way of having therapy in a way that was healthier and safer to do. But I wasn't okay. And I knew that my mental health was being really affected. It was around at this time, my brother Cameron had been committed to a mental hospital. So he was actually at a place, I know I'm going to say it wrong. I wanted to say it was Fairview, but it's not. But there was a place in Bellevue, and this doctor, Dr. Singh Suh, was well known, and he had me on a lot of medications that weren't working at a very, very young age. But he recognized what was going on with my brother, and he knew he needed help. They were ready to have me committed, and Dr. Suh said I was not to be committed. I did not have the issues that they were trying to make it out. And that, yes, while I was self-harming, it was something that could be treated at home. And so that's what ended up happening. Going through, I ended up getting with my ex-husband, like I said, 20 years old. 23, we got married. And that was, I think, the last time I saw her ex-husband, Mark. So this was a man that Ellen had been with for about 10 years. And while dancing at my wedding, he goes on to describe that he's going to make me a homemade sex toy and how he's going to do it and what it's going to do to me and how it's going to make me feel. And I felt disgusting. Like, that's just gross. You've already made me take pictures wearing like bikini tops and shit and taking them. And then he was just weird. And then he ended up getting really bad into sexual deviancy. So he would constantly try to grab me and touch me and make comments about my body. But then he would go and he would piss all over Ellen, like literally whip it out and all over her and do things to her. And I never understood why she put up with it. I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, why would you let somebody do that to you? I am disabled and I would never let a man or another woman piss on me. Like, that's just gross. And, kind of just got lost and was just like, whatever, like she's doing what she's doing. I'm drinking, I'm doing my life, I'm having fun. And she ended up moving in with me. She ended up leaving this man, moved in with me, thinking that it was going to be this great idea. And I saw really how toxic she was. We didn't talk for almost 2 years post the marriage. So there was a time period where I just didn't talk to her. I was really angry at her, and I see it now, and I just wish that I had stayed away because I wouldn't have gone through the shit that I went through in the last 4 years. So fast forward, married at 23, already been abused by multiple people, already have the worst self-confidence, and I'm just struggling with weight. And tried getting pregnant for a really long time. Couldn't get pregnant. I was told at 14 I had my first miscarriage following a breakup with a boyfriend, that my body had been pregnant, and then my body had decided that the embryo was not viable, and so my body passed it. So at 14, had my first miscarriage. And then while trying to get pregnant, had struggles with just trying to get pregnant. I have endometriosis, PCOS, heart-shaped uterus, pelvic kidney. I have birth defect. That's considered a birth defect with the uterus part. And they couldn't figure out what was going on with my body. I just always had pain, and they didn't know why. Actually went through the process at 2016. They were ready to put me on a shot to put me into menopause so that I could have a hysterectomy. Ended up backing out 2017, lost 120 pounds, ended up getting pregnant in early 2018 with Oliver. Oliver was a really, really hard pregnancy. I was in the hospital a lot, high risk. And I remember having to walk home from the hospital at 6 months pregnant after being in the hospital all day from a fall and having to walk a mile. My ex-husband was just lazy. He didn't take care of me. I was more of a problem than a convenience. And so we ended up having Oliver in October of 2018. I went through some really bad postpartum. I was not in a healthy relationship. I didn't have healthy relationships with people around me. I had an abusive mother-in-law, an abusive sister-in-laws, brother-in-law. I mean, just people just were not very nice to me. And at this point, I was still known as Andrea. And so I go through all of it and called my doctor's office, told them that they were either going to get me in and get me help for my postpartum, or I was going to drive my car off a cliff. And I was done. I was not going to let my son come to harm, but that I could not physically live the way that I was being forced to live. And I got help. So I got on some medication. That medication ended up having some adverse side effects. And in 2019, when COVID came around, little old Andrea here was a mom. I was working at a health center, a community health center. Ended up going to Vegas, being diagnosed with it, was in the hospital, and was one of the early COVID patients. I was over 350 pounds. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. I couldn't walk right. I thought I was going to go on the ventilator. They had me in a room. I wasn't allowed to have a lot of visitors. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they never ran the COVID tests. And they said they did not legally have to because there wasn't enough of an epidemic. But I had all the COVID symptoms. I had everything coming back the way that COVID was. And then I was actually told later on, because I ended up getting sick, I was one of the people with long COVID. So it ended up affecting my chemistry in my brain. And so I remember after getting COVID, I actually had applied for disability. I was like, I can't work anymore. I didn't feel right. I didn't feel normal, whatever normal was supposed to feel like. And I knew I was really sick.